The South African media industry commemorates the 46th anniversary of the National Press Freedom Day. The day also marks Black Wednesday, the day on which the apartheid government banned 18 publications in the country. Let's now bring in Hassen Lorgat from the People's Media Consortium. Hassen, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Let's just talk about the role of the media, particularly in today's times. I mean, for South Africa, for instance, we are heading into an election next year, so there is plenty at stake.
Yeah, I think that generally, if you do a search on South African media, you find that they've got a very, very good billing, in terms of Western standards. But you've got to look at where we've come from. We've come from the banning of black opinion in 1977. Inspired by the Black Consciousness movement. And so when doing a critique, we must celebrate the Constitution and what it has to offer. But quite clearly, we must ask ourselves whether black people feature as people of beauty on our screens, whether they have been sufficiently empowered, whether we in the media discuss the economic crisis in any serious way. There are a number of bottlenecks. And then, of course, while there's a democracy for many, there's a repression on those whose views are far more radical, such as Abahlali Basim John Dolo, who complain, rightfully so, they've taken it to the public platforms that 25 odd of the leaders have been assassinated because they've had conflicts over land. So you have that internecine violence that we have and we don't talk about. The killings of immigrants seems to be a national sport, So clearly we have a lot to go for, but also a number of challenges. So, for example, the Sunday Times are retrenching staff. Media 24 has got paywalls. How does it give access to poor and working people to access other opinions? Of course, we in the People's Media Consortium produce our own media, and we want to amplify our voice. That's how we came together. But clearly, there's a declining civic space. And before the elections that we fear, there'll be a lot more repression, not always reported. Let me give you an example. I want to say Comrade Mantash, because we were unionists together, has not spared any moment to criticize any NGOs for weaponizing what he called environmental issues, right? And clearly, there's a difference. Because the people who are producing the coal or the people who live next to it or those who have got other critical minerals, they clearly bear a disproportionate burden. And there's a national conversation to be held there. But to blame environmentalists because they're taken to court for weaponizing environmental preservation, he says, to block development, is tantamount to a slap suit. He's stopping it. He's not an ordinary guy debating with you and I. He's there talking as a politician, attacking NGOs. And these are the challenges that I put down. And of course, finally, I think that a number of good newspapers, such as Daily Maverick, they seem to have a blind spot, for example, when it comes to Palestine. Today, they ran with the opinion of the Biden and Netanyahu. And it's really, they're not like the SABC. They're not covering the view from a standpoint that says, hey, go a bit easy here, there could be something wrong, because there's a national sentiment that we have here as oppressed people and our historic alliances. So some of them have a blind spot. They seem to eulogize, praise, go over the top when it comes to American power. But that's not always good. It's not good for our democracy,
Let's talk about that blind spot. I mean, you mentioned that, and you mentioned democracy. A lot of the times we are told as journalists, that we are the upholders of democracy. But then you do hear of times where the media is called biased. The media is not reporting things in the way in which they should be reported. You've given several examples. But also, as much as we are so far back from, Black Wednesday of 1977, there's still so many moving parts. Just talk to us about the importance then of the responsibility of the media to stay very close to the truth and the reality of the situation, as opposed to, say, operating their own agenda, as some people have been criticizing the media for.
Listen, I say this not only because I speak to the SABC now. I have gone out to praise the public broadcaster. It has its faults. One of them is the structural and pernicious underfunding by the politicians, which leaves it very vulnerable for manipulation, right? and this is something that people watch before the elections. But at least you don't have the sectarian agendas. Some people accuse the SABC of maybe going soft on some politician, but generally you don't have those agendas that the private media seem to have. And we are glad that we have this balance, that the public broadcaster provides immense coverage in all languages, and that is an essential democratizing impact, because it tells people about their rights. If you listen to one of the stations, they'll tell you, they'll bring in a politician and say, hey, this is not happening, people have not had water. And you go to others, they go for the hits, and this is good radio and that. So what the public broadcaster brings, you must not undermine. I do lament that all the media generally, because of resourcing and other constraints, have not been able to have fuller discussions. We have not had fuller discussions of the NDP, where you had the deputy chair, I think, Prof. Maluleke, saying basically that we failed to meet our deadlines, that unemployment has increased. These discussions need to be held here. There need to be longer programs to interrogate that, because if you have them before the elections, there'll be pressure on you. But we seem to have an absence of in-depth discussions. You know, some of the radio stations do have it, and I'm a fan of some of them. But we need to have a lot more time, and we can't go with the Western soundbite. You can't have this 20-second, sorry, we're over now. No. These are big issues.
And Hassan,
Hassan,
I'm about to tell you we are over now because of time. But very quickly, I'd like you to just squeeze in this last answer, which is pertinent in terms of what is currently happening now, what we are seeing in terms of a conflict in certain areas and the responsibility of the media in those parts. Very quickly, Hassan, if I can get your comment on that.
The media must cease to follow his master's voice. They can't go with elite voices. When a medical doctor tells you that so many people have died, and then you go to the Knesset or somewhere and you say to them, no, we have reason to believe that not you didn't do it, the other guys did it. If that's a president talks like it is very from the Trumpian book. It is so Trumpian that I think Joe Biden and others have undermined himself. So you need to get voices, multiple voices, to get to the truth.